Wait, we wanted to?
No, we did.
Oh, yeah.
But you didn't have your meeting on the 8th, so you're welcome.
Thanks.
How are you?
Well, yeah, I just did, I wanna, so the plan is this, move this to the end. And then we'll see where we're at this week. And just reconvene like 12:50. And then, yeah, so the intent, hopefully the intent is not to take any input on the election cycle. So, we're gonna be when it's not consideration.
I'll let you go. Did I do something wrong? Am I in trouble?
Hey, oh, that's what I was, I just, did you hear, did Lynn tell you this week? He just told me
No, but
yesterday.
you made me sad. I get it.
Well, but I wasn't. Yeah. I'm well, how are you?
I'm watching the fire tweets.
Does he still want the meeting?
Yeah.
I think we need a what? All of those.
Hello. Hmm? You're welcome. I got a pen.
The election official?
Oh, well, we're not gonna do that one until, yeah.
And then you're gonna keep it on.
So that's their bottom line, right? They want us to take over 75 roads.
Yeah. And Samantha is not completely accurate in all of her statements of this is what we tried to do and we got to go.
Just, I don't know why. So how is it left?
Well, they say they've got all this data together, this information on these 75 issues that they provide to us.
Yes, but why do they think that it's our obligation? Because we issued permits?
Well, that's just one little issue. There's a bunch of them where our road encroaches on their ditch, there's other areas. So it's not just that issue. There's a lot of other issues too.
So on our encroachment, but they want us to straighten out our road and get it off their easement?
Well, that's some of it. So they've got there's 75 different issues. And
No, really different issues
Well,
or that fall into
75
two or three
locations where
categories?
there's a couple different
Yes, of
categories.
course.
But it's
Yeah.
one where they say we've encroached, where we've given inappropriate access, or no. But the one they keep talking about, apparently there is appropriate access, but people just don't use it. In this Camino Seco, there's an area where they have a right of way. The landowner has it, but he won't use it. He wants to be over on the ditch like, well, we're not gonna work with you anymore. Nobody knows about this, except apparently the people said we're not working with them anymore. So they're supposed to give us all the data they've got on these 75 incidences, so we can review it. And so she's supposed to have that to us by December 7th, and then, on the 12th, we're gonna have a quick, just, video chat meeting to say this is what we've got, and this is what our plan is going forward.
No, but we better sit down and kind of have a we already know what the issues are going to be. We just may not know what roads.
Right.
But that's kind of a policy decision. I mean, so,
So we need to get the data that they've got, and that's step number one. And
why
that,
haven't they just sent it to us? Oh, because they haven't completed it.
right. And the last I knew, we had a team from our group and their group working together. That was the last I ever knew about it, is that they were working together. And then she's like, well, I wanted a meeting with you. I was like, no, the last email I had from you was, okay, they're working on it. I don't think we need to meet anymore right now. But then she's like, I need a meeting, and so then I'm trying to coordinate, because we're in the middle of that whole thing with Burrell and Franklin,
Sure.
and so I didn't immediately, so she gave like 5 dates for a meeting, and a couple of them I didn't responded to her till they passed.
Good morning, everybody. It is 11:08 on Friday, November 18th, 2022. This morning, our invocation will be given by Pastor Leila Gomez from the Power of Praise Fellowship.
Father, we're so thankful, God, to stand here in this room, Lord, with our health and our strength and our right mind. We humbly ask, God, that, Lord, you would give us guidance on the issues that are set forth today. That, Father, Lord, you would touch these commissioners, our county officials, and everyone that's in this room. I pray, God, for their personal lives and their homes, that, God, you provide them strength and health and prosperity. And, God, I thank you, Lord, because you humbly use us to serve your people of Doña County. Help us, God, to always remember, Lord, that you're first and above all things. That, Lord, you are God and God all by yourself. And, Lord, everything that we do it with joy and gladness. We're still thankful, God, after all this time, that, Lord, you chose us to be of service, God, to your people. So I pray, Father God, that, Lord, you go before all decisions that are made here today, comments that are made, Lord, issues that are presented. Lord, we submit everything to you. And we ask, God, that, Lord, you would have your way in this place today. Holy Spirit, lead and guide these men and women. And, Father, we are thankful, God, for all of your provision over Doña County, for its citizens, God. We speak health, God, over our community, prosperity, Father, jobs, whatever that the daily needs are of your people, God, meet it. And if in any way, God, we can be an asset to you to achieve that, then, Lord, we say yes to you today. And, Father, we're thankful. We're thankful, God, for your being so mindful of us, caring about us, loving us, God. And I pray, Father, that, Lord, that would all be displayed here today. In Jesus' name we pray it. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Gomez. And if you all would rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amanda, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Allens?
Here.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Here.
Commissioner Chaparro? Vice Chair Murillo?
Present.
Chair Sanchez?
Present. The commission convenes as the Board of County Commissioners and the County Board of Finance in open session. Mr. Macias, I know on changes to the agenda, I think we were looking at agenda item number 2. I'd like to make the request that we move that to the end after agenda item 13.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is the information or the request that's been made in order to allow for some people, a greater number of people to participate in the recognition. So with your permission and the commission, if we could move item number 2 to the end of today's agenda.
Okay, and are there any other changes to the agenda?
No, sir, there are not.
All righty. Then we'll move forward. We'll move on to public input. At this time, I know we have our canvassing board meeting at 1 p.m. We're asking that the public input today be kept to items, if any public input is related to the election and the canvass, that be done at 1 p.m. If there are any other items for public input, we would invite those members of the public to speak now. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. When you come up, please state your name for the record. When you're done, please fill out the book that will be on your left. And if there are here for an agenda item here for this 11 a.m. meeting, we ask that you hold your public input until that item is up for discussion. All right, so given that, are there any members of the public that are here for public input? Good morning.
At this point, my name is Joseph Kincaid, and I'm not going to address the election directly because that will be done after lunch. There are members of our group, Coalition of Conservatives in Action, that will come up and address specific issues on that. What I wanted to talk about was more of a philosophic issue. I ran a business in Anthony for 35 years, and in my business training, I was taught about the principles of exchange. In a good business contract, social contract, there should be an even exchange where you get a value put in and you get an equal value put back out. You receive what you got as a good value for what you're selling or buying. If a business works in a principle of excess exchange, they're giving more, like a baker's dozen, so that the public feels like they're really getting a good value for their input. On the other hand, if a business cheats its customers and doesn't deliver what it says it's going to, that would be considered a criminal exchange. Now, in terms of our elections, we have had election fraud to deal with as long as there have been elections in the history of the world. That is the nature of humankind. It is your all's role to curtail the election fraud and to ensure that the public can trust what happens. Trust means prediction. If we don't believe that our votes are going to be counted fairly and that they actually make a difference, there is no trust. You all have a legal obligation to keep the public's trust and to investigate anything that would undermine that trust. So as you consider the facts that are presented this afternoon, I hope that you all will look at that and realize that you cannot, in good faith, with integrity, certify this election until all these questions have been answered, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kincaid. And I know while you were trying to keep them general, I know you are talking specifically about the canvassing and the election, the results of that. So again, I ask if there's any public input that we related to the canvassing, that be kept to 1 p.m. Is there any other public input?
Good morning, Commissioners. County Attorney, good morning. County Manager, thank you for the opportunity. I actually did want to talk about the election, but I can't be here at 1. I wasn't expecting that. So I'll take a philosophical approach too.
Ma'am, I'm sorry.
I'll
Like I
keep
said, if
it
it is for
short,
the
thank you.
canvas, we're not going to be taking public input at this time.
Okay, let me just talk on the same theme as that. I actually believe that you all, except for maybe one, do care about the community, that you want to do good for our community, you know, giving a rent assistance is a great thing. So it tells me that you have a conscience and that you know the decisions between right and wrong, and there are consequences. So a decision for right leads to life, and a decision for wrong leads to death, and the confusion and the chaos and the lawlessness that goes with that. So there's going to be consequences, and the issue of integrity never goes away, ever. And I just want you to look at the long-term consequences for your choices today, because freedom isn't free. And it takes courage to uphold freedom. And your grandkids, your kids and your grandkids, they want to be free. This is America, and we love liberty here, and we will fight for it. And I know that you want to do that too. And so I urge you to make good choices to restore the public trust. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you would if you would mind putting your name in the book here on the left, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No.
I did want to state my name, Beverly Courtney, District 3.
Thank you. Is there any other public input this time? Okay. Then we'll move on to staff input. Mr. Macias, is there any staff input at this time?
Mr. Chairman, there is not.
Okay. County elected official input? All right, then we're on to commission input. Anything from the commission? Mr. Macias, I know this is just a thought, and I hope this is something we can take a look at maybe in the future with the SCRTD. I know from April to June, we had helped provide services where there was zero fare for the SCRTD. Recently, the Roadrunner Transit System is now they're going to pilot their zero fare system. So something I would love for the commission to look at, and even more with the SCRTD, is seeing how we could possibly make that a zero fare system throughout the county, even if Roadrunner continues on doing zero fares. But my question is more around twofold and this is something maybe we can look at with the finances of the SCRTD and understand what is the real need to go zero fare? Because I know they have something built into the budget, but I'm curious as to whether those are the real numbers that we can use, and maybe we can have discussions with the SCRTD just to maybe explore and get an understanding of that. But the second piece was that the SCRTD cut their services from Hatch to Garfield. And the comment being that they didn't have enough ridership from Hatch to Garfield. And I think one of the concerns I have is being that the county has provided a huge amount of funding for the SCRTD. And the comments I get from, or the feedback I'm getting from constituents in my district is that now when they may not always have used the SCRTD, but now with that service cut, it's not an option anymore. And so we have people in Salem and in Garfield that have no connection to Hatch. And I'd love to have that maybe be explored a little bit further here as we move forward in the future with the BOCC and the county and how we continue to fund the SCRTD.
And Mr. Chairman, it is a legitimate concern because I believe that we had funded that route. And so if they eliminated the route.
Yeah, and so like I said, so those are the two things, like I said, I would love to maybe look into having further discussion, is seeing how we can work with, kind of looking at seeing how Roadrunner Transit's working and seeing if that's something we can do so that if we do have members of residents in the county that want to use public transportation, that might be something we could do or look at so they can ride fare free throughout the county.
And Mr. Chairman, we can meet with Mr. Armijo and we can obviously look in terms of the budget and how it's utilized and if there's reduction in services, but yet there is an increase in the commitment to financing from the county. How do those two really work together?
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have a request. If I can be able to get a updated map of the redistricting of my district, please.
And those maps, I think Jana had placed them in the offices of all of the commissioners, but we'll make sure that
If we can
anyone
have an
who's
extra one
lacking,
for the other office.
we certainly can get that for you.
Thank you.
In fact, we can probably get it before the meeting is ended.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Okay. Before we move on to minutes, is there any last commission input? No? All right, then we'll move on to the meeting minutes. Agenda item number 1, which is regular BOCC meeting minutes for October 25th, 2022. If I can get a motion and a second for approval.
I so move.
Moved by Vice Chair Murillo. Second. Second by Commissioner Reynolds. Is there any comments on the minutes? All right, any public input on the minutes? Hearing none. Amanda, will you call the roll on agenda item number 1, please?
Commissioner Allen?
Yes.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Yes.
Vice Chair Murillo?
Yes.
Chair Sanchez?
Yes, those minutes are approved. We'll move on to agenda item number 3, a presentation of investment portfolio for 2022. The County Treasurer, Mr. Eric Rodriguez. And the still new father.
Yeah. Still not getting those Z's. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Eric Rodriguez, County Treasurer, it is a pleasure to be with you this morning. As you're aware, the duties of the County Treasurer are to collect, disperse, and invest public money. And today I'm here in my capacity, in that third capacity as the manager of the investment portfolio. And so what I try to do every year is provide a recap of what the prior year's performance has been, what to expect in the coming fiscal periods, and pretty much just provide some transparency as to how we're managing and how the portfolio is doing for the public. So I believe I could take control here. Oh, here we go. So I always start with the primary objectives of the portfolio, and this is really across the board. Any government entity, any investment portfolio that you would look at should have these primary objectives, and these are the ones that we go by as well. Safety, liquidity, and return. Safety meaning we're not going to be investing public funds in anything that would put or jeopardize the cash flows, or I'm sorry, the funds, the reserves, from losses. So this is our primary objective, to ensure that we do not actually take any losses in the portfolio. Second objective is liquidity. We want to make sure that our checks will clear and that we will have enough funding for the projects and for the budgetary cycle that we are in. And finally, it is return. That is the investment return, the dividends, the interest that we earn. That is our last priority. Nevertheless, it is a priority. So in this presentation, we'll be going through the performance of the investment portfolio, how we're keeping up with our investment policy, and how those tie into our primary objectives of safety, liquidity, and return. Here is a snapshot of our portfolio. First off, we'll start with our balances. Right now, our portfolio balance is at over 171 million. Now, just to give you an idea of where we're at cash-wise, we're holding at least 8 times more than what the reserve requirement is for the state. The current reserve requirement for the state is at $20,678,000. So we're certainly holding a net reserve of 8 times more than what we're required to, and that requirement from the state is just to make sure that we have enough costs to cover those essential services that county governments provide. The value of the portfolio, as you can see, doesn't look very good. The market value is at 161 million. Our book value is 171 million. What this means is that when we purchased certain investment assets with our 171 million, right now they're only worth 161 million. So as you can see, we have an unrealized loss of 9.8 million. That's okay. That doesn't mean that the county's actually taking on this loss. This just means that if we were to liquidate everything that we have today, we would take on that loss. But fortunately, we've structured the portfolio to where we don't need to do that. And secondly, our investment strategy also requires us that we buy and hold, meaning we're going to hold everything to maturity until it pays us back. When it does do that, our par value is going to be $171,778,000. That means that we'll actually have a net gain of about $300,000 at that point if we were to wait with the exact amount that we have today for it to mature. The reason for that unrealized loss, the reason for that loss in market value is because a lot of the portfolio, a lot of the balances that we have in the portfolio were in investments that we were investing maybe pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and during that time, if you all recall, interest rates were dropped by the Fed to battle potential recession. And so as interest rates fell, we had no choice but to invest in those low interest rate assets that were in that environment. So this year, literally in the last 9 to 10 months, interest rates have increased significantly. I mean, we went from 0.25%, 0 to 0.25% to now we're over the 4% range. Because we're holding a lot of these assets that we purchased year back, when you compare those to what's available in the market today, obviously our assets are going to decrease in value because of the lower rates that we had to purchase them at. But again, that doesn't mean that we're taking a loss. It just means that the value of it, if we were to sell it today, would be much lower. The performance of our portfolio is right now, we entered an average rate of return of 1.34. That again, going back to the priorly purchased investments and the lower rate environment, some of the stuff that we were purchasing was under 1%, some of it 0.25%, where right now you could get something in the same maturity level for 3, closer to 5%. So when you compare that to our benchmarks, which is the U.S. Treasury at 4.25% and also the New Mexico local government investment pool, right now they're averaging around just over 3%. Yeah, our rate of return, our average rate of return is going to be lower. I do want to point out that the average rate of return is not the actual yield. That means we're getting more money in yield than we are, than that number tells you. But what I want to show there is just in terms of what we're purchasing, what we have in our portfolio in terms of the average rate, that is the average rate. We do yield more than that, but we're definitely not getting as close to the 3 or 4% that our benchmarks are at. Again, that's okay. We'll catch up to that and eventually pass it. And that's just a cycle that continues to go. So right now we're behind because of the rate environment that we were in a few years ago or a year ago.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Ellens?
so that 1.34% average rate of return is a picture of today. Is that correct?
Yes. If I took every asset that I have, my agencies, the CDs that we have, we were purchasing them at 0.25, maybe 1%. Some of them maybe we got as high as 1.25%. We take and average all those up, we're averaging around 1.34%. Now, we do have money in money markets that are earning, 3%, maybe 4%. I am purchasing agencies now that are closer to the 4% range. But when I get that bag of assets as of close of period September 30th, that is the average return, the average rate that we were getting at that time. So that is current as of September.
If interest rates remain this high, will the average rate of return increase?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we will eventually catch up to our benchmarks. We will eventually pass them. And in an environment where interest rates start getting lower, starting getting cut, we're going to be up here because our investment strategy, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later, we want to try to capture the interest rates that we have right now in our environment, and we want to try to hold on to those, secure those for a mid to long-term range. So if we're securing 4% interest rate right now on an agency, for example, if we could secure it for a 5-year term, let's say 2 years later, interest rates are cut down in half or even down to where we were around pre-pandemic levels, we're going to be sitting up here holding a bag of assets with interest rates higher than where they're at that point. And these rates, the U.S. Treasury and the local investment pool for New Mexico, those might be lower than where we'll be at that time. So again, it is a cycle. We're just always catching up. Eventually we catch up and we beat our benchmarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellens.
So the diversification of the investment, this is the makeup where we have our money invested into. As you can see, a huge part of that pie is in government agencies. The reason we have that in government agencies is when interest rates started going lower, we were trying to capture some of that return that was available in the market, and it was more favorable in the government agencies. The reason it was more favorable in the government agency space is because that is where, people were moving their money away from things like equities and other more private bond markets, and they were putting it in more secure spaces, and this is where they put money in U.S. Treasuries, they'll put money in government-backed securities like the U.S. agencies, and this is where the U.S. agencies were more favorable to us at that point, and that's why we started loading up more in that space. We also started purchasing in bigger blocks. Instead of purchasing in $1 million blocks, we started purchasing in $2 or $5 million blocks. And so we increased that piece of the pie. About a year ago, and two also, we always had more money in our money market, meaning that piece of the pie was in money markets instead of agencies. And now, as you can see, the money market decreased significantly because we were going after that security that the federal agencies provided. Our CDs, our brokered CDs, decreased significantly, and I suspect that in this area right here, in the brokered CD side, we will start increasing it, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So this will start increasing here. Let me see, local banks, this piece of the pie also decreased a little bit. The reason for that was interest rates locally just were not competitive enough. But we are now starting to see some more favorable rates. And of course, we do want to invest locally, so we will be increasing this $12 million balance in the local banks closer to the $20 million side. We have a couple of asset holdings in U.S. Treasuries. Other does include our bond that we have issued to CRUA. And we do invest a little bit in the municipal bond space, but not very much. So yeah, this graph will change next year, and you'll probably see it a bigger chunk with brokered CDs at that time, so we could capture some of that long-term interest rates. This is a breakdown of our holdings specifically per agency. And the reason I put this on here is to show where we're at in terms of spread across the portfolio, showing that we're avoiding concentration risk. And concentration risk being we're not concentrating on just one type of asset, we're diversifying it so it's evenly spread throughout. So as you can see, we have money, 11% of the portfolio is in the money markets, and we want to keep that always over 10%. We could go up to 60%, and these limits are what the investment policy allows us to get to. So we could go up to 60%, but if we're taking money out to invest over here to capture more return, but we also don't want to go under a certain percentage on the money markets because that is our liquidity portfolio. That just means we want to make sure we have money on hand for any budgetary needs that we have in the cycle. Brokered CDs, we are at 10%. We could go up to 35%. All our government agencies, the Fannie Mae's, Freddie Mac's, Federal Agricultural, Farmer Mac's, Federal Home Loan Banks. None of those specific ones go over 30%. The one that we have more vested in is the Fannie Mae, Federal Farm Credit, and that is, we have $51 million in that, but that only makes up 29% of the portfolio. This will actually start decreasing as some of these assets are coming due in the next couple months, and they'll be evenly spread throughout here. We do not invest in, even though we're allowed to, we do not invest in any of the Sallie Mae student loan assets. We just don't see any value in that. We have our municipal bonds. We have a small percentage there. In U.S. Treasuries, those are usually a little bit more difficult for us to come by at par value, but we do have some of those there, very small percentage of the portfolio. The last 2 years, we've been able to invest in commercial paper. Right now, as of the close of this period, we did not have any money in commercial paper, and commercial paper is very short term. This is money that we invest in 1 or 2 months tops. We don't get further than that. We are able to invest in what's called supranationals, that's sovereign bonds, and supranationals is us being able to really go overseas and invest, but really it's only 3 entities, which is the World Bank, IFC, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Anyways, those are some options in case things here locally in the U.S. interest rates were not as favorable. we could go out and look for those. Right now, I do not have any holdings in sovereigns, as interest rates in the U.S. have been more favorable out there. And of course, I spoke about the local bank balance. We do intend to increase this 12 million, or this 7% of the portfolio, closer to 10%, if not surpass that 10%. Local investment is important to us, and that is something that we'll be getting back into.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner
go
Owens?
back to the previous slide. Could you go back to the previous slide?
There we go.
The lack of investment in the Student Loan Marketing Association, Sally Mae, does that have anything to do with the Biden student loan forgiveness program?
Not prior. It's just those are not ones that are usually typically in our brokered list. A lot of times the interest rates on those just weren't very favorable. You got to understand they're backed by student loans, so we feel that it's a little bit of a higher risk because we're depending on people making those payments, and in prior years those revenues just weren't coming in, so we back off a little bit from that. With the Biden, what they're trying to do is with them writing off those loans, it does present that risk. But we were already staying away from them to begin with. We think those are already risky in itself. So whether it's Biden's in there or Biden's not forgiving those debts, it was a space where we just don't feel that comfortable with as we do with the mortgage-backed securities. So yes and no, but it definitely has some influence in making a decision whether we want to invest in those student loan backed securities.
You got 7.5% invested in local banks. Do you intend to increase that?
Yes, sir. Yeah. And the only reason our balance was about 18 million about a year ago. The reason it shows at 7% is you got to bear in mind, we haven't talked about ARPA funds that we got. I mean, in the last 2 years, we had an influx of over $42 million in our portfolio. So that decreases the percentage amount of what we're investing in local banks. And in the last year, as rates were super low and a lot of these CDs that we have invested in local banks were coming due, we would go back and look at what rates were available to us, and they just were not meeting even our minimum benchmarks. Local banks take a little while to catch up with other rates that we could get out there, but we're still willing to invest in them primarily to put the money back locally. We just want to meet a certain threshold for us to invest in there. And I think and right now they can meet that threshold. So we'll start, once we get more liquidity, we'll start investing back into banks. As a matter of fact, I'm waiting to renew a CD with a local bank today to increase that balance for the portfolio here locally. So our goal is to keep a certain percentage in local banks, and that's always no lower than 10%. And right now we are under that, but next year we should be way over that.
Thank you.
So in talking about maturity distributions, how do we manage our monies on the timeline? And this graph I'm super proud of because that just says that we're investing it in a way that if things are coming mature, in a laddered approach, and that's always been our investment strategy, is ladder it to where any assets that are coming due, we're able to take advantage of the current rate environment as it is today and invest those assets back into the ladder. We're always going to have more money available to us in the 0 to 1 year mark, and this is, again, meeting our liquidity needs. We're not loading up over here in the 5-year mark to where we're tied up and we don't have any money for liquidity purposes. So this is typically the slope that you want to see in a maturity distribution, is from top to bottom and is fairly even balanced out to make sure that we have liquidity available based off of our maturities. So in the next year, we have this liquidity available or maturities that we're going to be able to invest in and push them out into this space over here in the 3, 4, 5-year marks, and we'll be able to capture those higher returns. My intent is to capture those longer term rates that are higher right now, which we suspect might not be in this high forever. We want to try to lock those in, and what that's going to create is sort of what they call a barbell, and it's not next year. If we look at it, this graph right here, it's going to go down and it's going to go up a little bit around here. And what we're doing is we're loading up a little bit on the longer term space, again, to capture those interest rates that we have available to us today. Of course, we're going to have to be very careful with this to make sure that we always continue to maintain liquidity, but nevertheless, it is a strategy that will be able to give us higher returns in the long run, and that interest rate average that I showed you earlier, that was at 1.34, that's going to look more like 3-4% in a couple years. Our credit quality, what we're showing here is the risk that we're taking on, and this just shows you that we're not taking on very much risk. The portfolio is not exposed to that much risk because we manage it in a way and invest it in certain assets that are rated at certain credit rating or credit quality heights. And so, for example, 133 million of our portfolio is invested in AAA rated quality assets. That means that they are less likely to credit default, they're less likely to fail, and therefore our money is less likely to experience any losses. 1.8 million is invested in AA1 ratings. 104,000 is AA2. 1 million is invested in AA3. We have 500,000 in an A1 and nothing in the A2 sector. 17 million of our holdings are FDIC insured. That means the FDIC will come in and cover that up to $250,000 per asset. This is all our brokered CDs. I believe we have over 80 brokered CDs now, each one of them at $250 increments. The money that's not secured by FDIC or not backed by the government and has a credit rating, that money, which is typically in our local banks, that money is typically collateralized. Now, for our local banks, we require a minimum of 50% collateral. And depending on the rating of the bank, that might go up to 100 or 102% collateral. What's not rated on here is a 4.2 million as just part of the portfolio. That 4.2 million is a bond that the county issued to itself for utilities. Now is a bond that CRUA utility is paying us. We're including it in the investment portfolio because we do get a 2% return on that bond payments, from those bond payments.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Thank you.
Why would you invest in tiers that have a greater likelihood of default?
So this next part of the slide right here is the grade scale. And we use the Moody's grading scale. A1 is prime. That means this is where your U.S. Treasuries are at. This is government-backed securities, U.S. Treasury backed by the U.S. government. Then you have your AA1, AA2. These are all still high grade to upper medium or prime grade assets. We don't invest, this is where you're getting into trouble or more risk down here. And the reason I include this grade scale right here is so you could compare it to everything that we have. It is all up here in the high grade. So none of these are necessarily taking on any more risk than this. It's just the credit rating that is applied by the credit rating agency. As an example, I don't think that the county has a Moody's credit rating, but in the Standard & Poor's credit rating, the county is at a AA1, I believe, which is just one step away from the AAA rating. And you know, that rating could be several reasons why it's not all the way at the very top, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the county's more of a risky investment if we were to issue any bonds. It just says that it's not, you know, as secured as the U.S. government itself. And then again, all these down here, the FDIC, that's the FDI, the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance. It's coming in case a bank fails, your assets are always secured, collateralized. The banks themselves will provide their own assets as backup in case they fail as well. But yeah, none of these are in anywhere near these risk levels. There are always high grade or prime. This is, again, complies with our policy that we do not invest in anything lower than that.
What is P1?
I'm sorry?
What is P1?
So, and if you see these two columns right here, you have the long-term assets and the short-term assets. And the long-term assets, that's usually for all your bonds, maybe your CDs as well. Short-term assets, they have a different credit rating because of their liquidity, so it's more like cash. The P1 credit rating, I'm not sure what P really stands for, but the P1 credit rating would be for our commercial paper, and that's the only rating that we would use the P1 for. If I had anything in commercial paper at the end of this close of this period, I would show that balance up here, and it would only be in a P1 rated commercial paper bond. So commercial paper, we could invest, let's say, Caterpillar. Caterpillar issues some commercial paper. As long as Caterpillar is rated as P1, which is a high grade comparable to the AAA, AA1, AA2, as long as they're rated as P1, I could invest in Caterpillar for a very short time because it's only commercial paper. Caterpillar, I cannot invest in longer than 6 months, or sorry, longer than 3 months. It could only be 3 months or shorter. Everything that's longer term, that's under the long-term rating, and that's where you get your AAAs and AAs, and that's where those assets are rated on that side. So the difference with the Ps and the As is your short-term assets and your long-term assets.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Treasurer Rodriguez, looking at the $12 million locally and with the banks, and you said it had a 50% collateralization. It seems like the local banks, most of the stuff that they have that they invest in actually require the same as mortgage rates, which require, I think, a 120% collateralization on their mortgages, if I'm not mistaken, at least at the federal level. And I don't know about the local level, so I'm surprised it's only 50%. I would think it'd be collateralized closer to 100%.
So, as the county treasurer, I have the decision, I can make the decision to collateralize at 50, 100, or 102. What I do for local banks is only require a 50% collateral requirement if they're local. And the reason for that is because if I give a bank $1 million and I say, put this $1 million in a CD for 5 years, by law, they have to collateralize it. And if I say collateralize 102% of that, they'll have to take their own cash, their own holdings, and secure my $1 million with another $1 million of their own.
Correct.
What that does is tie up their money.
Right.
Now they can't lend that $1 million. So if it's a local bank, I'm able to work with them and say, well, only tie up $500,000 of that $1 million, so you could use the other $500,000 to lend back to the community. So in effect, I'm really netting or giving the local bank $500,000 instead of actually $1 million. Now, there is a caveat to that is we do follow the state, I think it's the state investment councils. They do a review of banks within that could accept public money within the state. If they set collateral requirements, and if a local bank is on that list and that says this bank needs to have at least 100% or 102%, then we'll follow that because they're doing the research for us, making sure that the bank has a certain amount of assets isn't a risk to us to lower the collateral level. If the bank, most banks, local banks, meet the thresholds to only require a 50% collateral level, then I'm willing to work with that because it is allowed by state law. And again, it is helpful for a local bank so they don't have to tie up their own money.
Okay, but my confusion is, and not that I believe what you're saying, and I think that's great. my confusion is that if I'm a local bank, and I've spoken to a couple of them, that they actually, when they loan money for a local business or a local property, if it's commercial, then they loan locally. If it's private homeowners, they generally go to something like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or something like that, and sell the loans. But locally, they tend to carry a lot of those loans for local businesses locally, and I thought they still capitalized somewhere close to 100%. And if we partially invested in the local economy with businesses as our investment, then wouldn't we also be collateralized without requiring them to have to spend their cash to do that? You see, so let's say we open a dry cleaner here in town, and they actually they take that loan locally to a local bank, and they keep it locally because it's a business. I would think that they would collateralize that closer to 100% out of their own money, since they don't sell it at the federal level. That's all I'm saying. Maybe we should talk about this offline.
Yeah, it's,
Because this is, it's a little more complicated.
I see where you're going with that, but that really would fall more on the bank and the risk that they're willing to take. I mean, they have a whole underwriting process that they're going to be lending to a local business. They have an underwriting process as to, and to determine the rate that they're going to be charging this business for the loan. But on their balance sheets, what we could do as a government by investing in local banks is increasing their balance sheets ever so slightly, so they have more cash available. They don't have to borrow from the Fed, to meet their reserve requirements and so on and so forth. But yeah, that 50% just simply means I'm not going to require them to secure all of their holdings or the full amount that we deposit simply to hold our money. And that's another reason why local banks might not be too privy to come to us and say, hey, we want to hold county money or government money, because they know they have to collateralize it. And sometimes they want to keep that liquidity, and they'll just say, we prefer to keep our assets liquid.
Yeah, and so by us doing that, we actually give them more capital to work with, is what I think you're saying.
By lowering that threshold. And many treasurers throughout the state, they just leave it at 100% no matter what. I feel that as long as they're meeting, certain requirements, minimum balances on their balance sheets, that most local banks will be strong enough to be able to not be at credit risk and be at default. And so I feel comfortable enough to lowering that and helping them out to increase their balance sheets.
All right, thank you.
So overall, this just shows you that the type of the type of risk that we're taking on the assets that we're investing it's like if you were investing in a person, what kind of credit rating do they have and what possibility that they're going to pay you back. We only stay on the higher credit rating grades. We do not invest in these lower sectors, ensuring that we do not expose ourselves to risk of loss. I'll briefly go through this 5-year monthly earnings comparison. It's a lot going on here, but I just wanted to show you here on a month-to-month basis per fiscal periods, how much revenues, the differences in our revenue fluctuations. As you can see in the month of December and January, typically on any given fiscal period, we do receive higher returns. Obviously in 2019 and fiscal period 20, we did a lot better because of the interest rates at that time. And this is when we have money from our property tax collections. In March and June, the beginning and the end, and the middle and the beginning and the end of the year, we always have revenue payments from bonds that pay quarterly or pay half a year, or pay annually. And this is why you have these influxes in revenue during those periods. I will point out to these two bars at the end of every month. Those are the last 2 fiscal periods. As you can see, our revenues declined significantly down to this range. We'll talk about that in the next slide. So earnings in the last 5 years. From 2018, we received $734,000. We jumped up to 1.2 million, and from there we jumped up to 1.5 million in fiscal year 2020, right before the pandemic. And then all of a sudden we had this drop off right here of, I believe that's about 50% drop off from the fiscal period in 2020 to 2021. As you can see, this is the effect of the pandemic and the lowering of interest rates. And then we did have a small increase from 2021 to 2022 of about 12%, but our portfolio has not reached these levels of pre-pandemic revenue that we were receiving. So It was expected. If you recall, 2 years ago, I sat before you here and gave this presentation, and I said, we're going to see a decrease in revenue. It will be significant, and here is the effect of that. However, I don't want to leave off just talking about the negative, the decrease in revenues without showing you what's forecasted. So I added this slide right here. In the last 2 years, that's the green and the blue bar line right here, we weren't really breaking the $100,000 per month threshold. This red line is what we've done up until October, up to here. This is all realized interest revenue that we've received. And from here forward, it's forecasted. We're going to definitely see some returns in these next 2 months, November, December, because of property tax revenues that we're holding, and we're immediately investing those monies until we distribute. Then it stabilizes back up, but I do not suspect that we'll be receiving less than $100,000 per month. So what that means is from the previous slide, when I show this to you next year, this bar for fiscal year 2023 is really going to be somewhere up here in the 2.1, 2.2 million. And so we'll see how that pans out. I think that in the rate environment that we are right now, if we make sure that we strategize and invest mid, long term and hold on to those rates, we'll be good with revenues in the coming years. Our investment policy compliance, one of the things that we do as the Investment Advisory Committee, which we met on Monday, is review the compliance that we have in their investment strategy to our investment policy. Since our 3 objectives are safety, liquidity, and return, this is pretty much my report card on myself. I'll make sure am I meeting these requirements. So through safety, I look at the different types of risk: concentration risk, maturity risk, custodial credit deposit risk, custodial credit investment risk, credit risk, and interest rate risk. And this is just making sure that I'm meeting these parameters. I won't go through these one by one, but this is just making sure that I'm not investing so much in just one thing, that I'm spreading and diversifying the portfolio in different assets, different maturity classes, and then that I'm not taking on more risky investments. And we are in compliance with all of those. As far as liquidity, our second objective is making sure that we have money available for budgetary purposes. We also are meeting those liquidity requirements. Our cash flows, we are meeting that to make sure that we're meeting the current budgetary cycle. Static liquidity, that's just liquidity for anticipated budget demands. This is for budget requirements that we have later in, down the road, maybe in May, April. We're making sure that we have money set aside for those anticipated budgetary requirements. And then for dynamic liquidity, this is unanticipated budget demands that might come along. This might be something from environmental disasters that we might have here in the county that we might put some money aside. We make sure that we have enough liquidity for those types of unanticipated needs. And then finally, on return, I did put a not in compliance on this one, and I'm just not meeting the benchmarks. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the reason we're not meeting the benchmark on our average rate of return is simply because as fast as interest rates have been increased, it's been very difficult for us to keep up based on the maturities that we have. Eventually, we will surpass that, and we will be in a very good position in a couple years. So moving forward, what is our strategy? We take advantage of interest rate risk. We take advantage of any rate increases. Focus more on mid to long-term assets as liquidity allows. Again, that's just making sure that if we have options to secure a 4% rate for the next 5 years, we want to secure in case rates do go down, we have that 4% interest rate 3-4 years later. Manage cash flows to maximize returns. This is making sure that we will always have the liquidity we need, but still managing as much as we can in the portfolio. Secure low-call risk or bullet holdings. This just means that any agencies that we purchase, a lot of times they have the ability to be called back, and if they get called back because rates are lower at any time, then we lose out on that interest, and now we have to go and invest in a lower interest rate asset. So what we try to do is lock up what's called bullets. These are agencies that do not have that call feature and will not easily be pulled back. An increase in brokered CD holdings. I mentioned earlier in the pie graph that we were going to be increasing our CD holdings. And the reason for that is because CDs you invest in a certain period, and those typically do not have call features. So that means if I secure a 5-year CD, I'm going to have it for 5 years, and the interest rate that they're offering is comparable to agencies, so it just makes sense to lock in those CDs that don't have any call risk and will have about the same return as all the other agencies. And then maturity spread may skew towards a barbell. I mentioned earlier on that sloping maturity graph that goes down, that if we secure a little bit on the longer term to keep some of those higher interest rates, that maturity graph is going to barbell go up a little bit, but it's going to be very small, and it's going to be very carefully structured so that we don't risk liquidity. So economic factors to consider. What can we look at in the economic environment that's going to affect us in the future? Interest rate hikes may continue. So this is a quote taken by Fed Governor Wheeler, and he says, and this is actually, I think, last week, these rates are going to stay. Keep going up, or they're going to stay high for a while until we see inflation get down closer to our target. The Fed's target inflation rate is 2%. Right now, the latest numbers that came in, inflation had decreased ever so slightly to 7.7%. So the Fed still has a way to go. And the theory, or at least the sentiment that's out there, is the Fed will likely continue to increase rates. As a matter of fact, they're expected to increase rates this next coming month by 50 basis points. And so that's just a continuing trend to try to tackle inflation. You look at on the government side, Treasury Secretary Yellen says, don't read too much into the cooling CPI data. This is a headline from Bloomberg. So recent government data, the inflation numbers did come in lower than expected, but if the secretary is saying, well, don't read too much into it, they're just basically saying we still have a ways to go. And that's sort of the sentiment. So what does that mean for us in our portfolio? Well, we can expect interest rates to continue increasing, and so that's good news for our portfolio because we're going to continue capitalizing on those higher interest rates. But we also have to be careful because of these continued increases in interest rates, the recessionary factors could be triggered. Right now, recession probability forecasts are high. Some models predict 70%. Some of them are going up to 80, also closer to 90% that a recession will happen in the next year because of the aggressive approach of the Fed to increase interest rates. And so it's going to have to be a balancing act. Of course, we can't forecast the future, but as long as we're structuring our investment portfolio to where we try to capitalize on the current interest rates on a little bit of a mid to longer term range, then we could hold on to some of those interest rates in the long run and not lose out on them in just a year or two. So commissioners, that is what I have for you as far as the investment portfolio. I stand for any questions.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Treasurer Rodriguez, so would that, if I understood you correctly, part of that bell curve is actually going to provide us the ability to invest in guaranteed return at this time. Since the interest rate is going up, we'll invest the long-term money into a guaranteed return on our money rather than something that's more liquid. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, towards that. It's by us barbelling, it's loading up a little bit on the longer term. So what we want to do right now is if the Fed is expected to continue increasing rates, we want to put ourselves in a position where we lock in a rate today, let's say 4%.
Right.
And the Fed increases it to 5%. So you might say, oh, we would have waited a little bit longer. We could have capitalized and gotten that 5%. Sure. But let's say it maxes out at 5 or 6%. And then the Fed says, oh, wait a minute, there's a recession. We need to start cutting rates down.
Correct.
So everybody that locked in that 5% has a huge call risk, meaning they're going to get called when the Fed lowers the rates back down to 4.5%.
Correct.
We're going to be safe because we're here in the 4% environment still, so we're still not getting those assets called. And then finally, if they continue lowering rates till they get that under that 4%, then finally we get called. So what we're trying to do when we're barbelling is we're trying to do one of two things. We're trying to secure assets that don't get called for a year or two or have very low call, or we're going to secure in brokered CDs, which have no call feature at all.
Bingo.
And we secure that 4% no matter how low interest rates go down in the near future. we secure those interest rates for 4 or 5 years later. And the reason I put the economics factors is things that we're considering is if recession probabilities are high, then that means that there's going to be monetary policy to try to mitigate that, and lowering of interest rate is going to be on the table. And so we want to be in a position where, well, it doesn't matter if they lower interest rates, we're going to keep our 4 or 5% ranges. So now on the inverse of that, however, if they continue increasing rates and a year or two later we are seeing a 10% rate environment, then yeah, we certainly had an opportunity loss there, but it's an opportunity loss, not an actual.
But you would still want to invest in those in short term.
No,
If
absolutely.
that continues to go up because of the volatility of the situation with the risk of inflation.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah.
Yes, sir. And as long as we're keeping that maturity graph, starting from here down, we'll nevertheless always be in a good position to take advantage of a 10% rate if it ever got to there. But yeah, we keep an eye on that, and kind of that's helps us guide us as to where we want to go with our portfolio. But overall, the portfolio never takes on any more risk. The portfolio really continues to be safe, liquid, and returns. They could fluctuate, but the main thing here is making sure that we do not lose any public money.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rodriguez, just a quick question. I know among the funds that we have within our reserves is the ARPA funding that still hasn't been expended as of yet. Where do we currently have those funds invested? I know you had the whole list there, but
Sure.
is that something within the short term, long term? Where do we have those?
A little bit of both. So in the ARPA funds, my first question when we knew ARPA money was coming is, can I invest it? Fortunately, Treasury guidance came back and said, yes, these monies can be invested. So we started working that money immediately. Now, the rate environment that we were at was under 1%. So we have, I think a couple million booked at 1%, but they do mature before the deadline that we have to return, if we have to return those monies. So right now, the bulk of investments in ARPA money is government agencies, the federal farm loans, federal farm credit, Fannie Mae's, Freddie Mac's, and we have a huge chunk of it in money market liquidity. So we're trying to keep it liquid because we are expending some of that money. As a matter of fact, up until the period end of September 30th, our balance had been drawn down from 42 million to 32 million. And in that short period, in the period since we received the money, we've generated about 161 million in revenue from ARPA funds alone. That number will go up significantly because of current rates. But to answer your question plainly, is we're holding it in money markets. We'll probably be putting it in mid-range assets like 1 or 2 year agencies, but we still being very careful to make sure that those expenditures, the monies will be available for those expenditures, those ARPA expenditures, if they're ever needed, and if they're ever called back by the U.S. Treasury, which I think the county is doing a good job to make sure that we use every penny of that we don't have to return it.
Yep. Okay, very good. And I think I appreciate your discussion on it. I think particularly when understanding that there's a liquidity there in the case when we're ready to spend it, but it's nice to know that we're putting that money to work while it is in our hands. So appreciate
We're fortunate
managing
that
of it.
interest rates on money markets are very favorable right now. So even if they are in cash, we're still getting a good return on it. So yeah, ARPA is going to generate some good revenues, and we're tracking it separately in a different portfolio, but it's invested very similarly to how we're doing all our other funds.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Are there any questions? Commissioner Ellens? Oh, and your microphone.
I would like to digress for a moment. Eric, this will probably be our last public confrontation.
Oh, that is true.
And I think back to when you ran, I think 4 years ago for the first time.
6 years now.
Ably assisted by our now disgraced former county treasurer. And there was rampant speculation that you would bring him into your administration, probably as chief deputy. And to the surprise of some, and to the delight of money, you did not do that. In fact, I think you have done a terrific job since you have been county treasurer, and your staff, led by you, has done a terrific job. And I want to compliment you on 4 years, and I wish you even better for 4 years in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellens. I appreciate those comments. My goal since day one has always to serve the public, and I hope that I have done that in the last 6 years. And I will continue to do that in the next 2 years. But I knew that the decisions that I made initially going into the office should be for the public interest and not anybody else's. And so I held to that, and I continue to hold to that. And this is why I'm here presenting what I do every day when managing public funds, to show you what I, give you a report card and make sure that people know what I've been doing is really for the public benefit.
Keep achieving.
And best of luck to you, Commissioner. It's been a pleasure working.
I lost track, sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellens. Is there any other questions or comments for the treasurer?
Mr.
Thank you
Chairman,
so
thank
much.
you very much, Commissioners.
Happy Thanksgiving. Okay, we're on now to the consent agenda. This is items 4 through 12. Are there any items on the consent agenda that commissioners would like to pull for separate consideration? Commissioner Reynolds?
Yeah, item number 6, I have a couple of questions on that.
Okay. Mr. Macias and
Yes,
Baker, would we be able to?
Administrator Baker is present.
Okay.
Good morning, Brian Baker, Detention Center.
Good morning. Director Baker, looking at the numbers here, it looks like that we're paying for them to set up the kitchen, and then we're paying 6 months worth of rental on the kitchen, is that correct?
It's already been set up. That's going to be the entire invoice. But yes, it's going to be a total duration of 6 months, and we have to pay for the setup and the tear down.
Yeah, it was, well, two things. It was set up on November the 10th, correct? That's
No,
when
it
the
was set up
contract started.
previously, but the original amount that we were planning on spending was well below what we were expecting to have to bring before the commission, and this is the entire amount. After they got into the kitchen project, they discovered how long the project's going to be, because it was originally going to be a 3 to 4 month project, and it has been extended because of various issues with the construction.
So it's going to be 6 months?
Yes, it's going to be
Correct.
6 months total.
Okay, so what was the cost of actually the setup?
It was under like 60,000, I believe, originally, but then because of all the different construction parts that have gone in, then they gave us a new invoice.
Okay, well, the reason I'm asking is this invoice doesn't seem to match what you're asking for.
It
And-
is to allow for, in case there's other problems with the construction and there's a further delays, because what we run into is a lot of lead time issues. So this is best case scenario, everything comes in, lead times are accurate for all the equipment that needs to come in. If it comes in like it's supposed to, then we're there. At that point, we don't have to face an issue with coming back and saying, hey, we need to have this much more money or this much more money.
Okay, here's my question. How much money does it look like you're going to need to do this project? I mean, if you look at it today and you say everything goes smoothly, this is how much it's going to be.
That was the 1.4 million total to do the project.
Yeah, but he's talking specifically to
Well, the reason I'm asking is these numbers don't add up. I looked at the numbers, and they don't even total any way, any shape or form to what you're asking for.
And Commissioner Reynolds, you're asking because the invoice is showing the 380,000?
But when you add up the totals, it's over $500,000. So, I mean, when you take the raw numbers, it adds up to $500,000, but yet this is asking for, I can't read without my glasses, sorry. You're asking for 381,000, but none of the numbers add up to 381,000, and the total adds up to over $500,000. So I'm just trying to get an accurate invoice for what we're trying to approve here.
My knowledge is we already paid some of it because we already had to start with the setup and everything like that. They generated a new invoice showing the amount that we would need to complete the project at that point. It doesn't include all the preliminary stuff that's already been spent.
Okay,
So when you add up all those numbers, yes, it's going to exceed what that bottom line is,
exactly.
but the total project is now going to be about $450,000.
Okay,
So that's why.
all right. So if I look at the request on the resolution, let's see, the amount is $450,000. And you're saying that that is accurate, and if
Yes.
we approve $450,000, it's going to cover the whole $500,000 worth of work.
Yes,
That's listed here.
yes.
Is there any way we can get this, Mr. County Manager?
Mr. Chairman,
Is there any way we can get a document that actually supports what we're approving as opposed to us just saying, yeah, we're going to approve 450, but we have no invoice or any documents to substantiate it?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that shouldn't be any difficult in terms of a revised invoice from the company. But let me kind of just put it in context. What the commission did was allocate $1 million for this project, which is a complete renovation. But when the contractors, and again, what was anticipated was $800,000 that would go into the construction and $200,000 would go into having this mobile kitchen, because of course we couldn't stop the food services.
Correct.
But couldn't do the food services out of the existing kitchen. What, by the time they actually went out to contract it, the cost, and especially after they had opened up the floors and opened up the walls in terms of the renovations that were going to occur, they were finding areas that were not up to code because the building is the age that it's at. So basically, the $1 million that was authorized by the commission was taken in just the construction portion. It wasn't the 800,000, we had to use the entire $1 million.
Okay.
So what Administrator Baker has come back is basically indicating the amount that had been set aside out of that $1 million for this mobile kitchen, it isn't there anymore because we had to use it for the construction part of it. So literally, you're being asked to authorize up to an amount that will cover not only that initial $200,000 that the commission had committed, but then had to go into construction costs, but the full cost of having that mobile kitchen operation since it began. It was set up months ago.
Yeah.
Months ago, it's been
2 or 3
operating.
months ago.
Well, yes, months ago in terms of being able to provide food. So this amount is to cover that and to cover the additional costs that are going to be involved these next 2 or 3 months.
Okay, I'm still have some questions. So you did use some of the $200,000 in order to get the mobile kitchen brought to the site? Is that at the $60,000?
That, I don't believe has actually been spent yet. We haven't been fully in, because when the rental period totally ends, that's when they start billing us. To my knowledge, we haven't received a actual, hey, you need to pay us this now. They're waiting till the end of the contract, and the amount's going to be due.
Okay, so when was the kitchen actually set up?
It was July or early August.
Okay, so July or early August, we'll just say early August, just to make it easy.
So, and I'm sorry, Commissioner Reynolds, and if we don't mind, I know we're getting deeper than I thought we were going to be doing on an item that's on consent agenda. So
Well,
I
you
would
pull it.
highly suggest either we pull it, let's review
Let's do that.
and then that way
Yeah.
we can have a deeper discussion if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'd like to pull it for separate. We got deeper than I thought we would, too.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I would like to pull it for separate approval.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So like I said, I just wanted to make sure we get the other ones done and then we can, okay, so if that's,
So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, we'll pull item 6 and schedule it for Tuesday's meeting, and we'll get all of the appropriate paperwork in order to respond to the questions that Commissioner Reynolds has
Mr.
raised.
Chair, I think that's a fantastic idea. Thank you, Manager.
so I think in terms of the mechanics, Mr. Gooden, would you have any issue? We'll approve the consent agenda minus item 6, then we'll table item 6 to the date certain. Will we need to do that or just not approve it and move on?
Mr. Chair, either way works. I mean, we can postpone it until a date certain, being Tuesday, and then we will, I think we've already sent out an agenda for Tuesday, but we can do an amended agenda that would have it on it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I
So
think
we
have
can
to-
either just completely withdraw it, not address it today. We can postpone it until Tuesday, But it will be, the agenda would then need to be amended to include it on there.
Okay, very good.
I'd like to, yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. I'd like to postpone it to the date certain of November the 22nd and amend the agenda. I'd like to make a motion that we do that.
Okay, so we'll have there's a motion on the floor to postpone agenda item number 6 to a date certain to November 22nd. Is there a second? I'll second that motion. Is there any comments on the motion to postpone to a date certain?
Just a thank you.
All right, so Amanda, if we would get a roll call to postpone item number 6 to November 22nd, the BOCC meeting on that day.
Commissioner Allens?
Yes.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Yes.
Vice Chair Murillo?
No.
Chair Sanchez?
Yes. Okay, so we will move agenda item number 6 to November 22nd. And then, so we'll need a motion then on the consent agenda items, number 4, number 5, and then 7 through 12. We can get a motion to approve those
So
items.
moved.
We have a motion by Commissioner Allens to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Vice Chair Murillo. Are there any comments on those agenda items, 4 through 5 and 7 through 12?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Okay, no, I'm sorry, I was just looking at it. No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right. If you call the roll on agenda items 4 through 5 and 7 through 12.
Commissioner Allens?
Yes.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Yes.
Vice Chair Murillo?
Yes.
Chair Sanchez?
Yes.
Consent agenda have a few resolutions. Item number 5, resolution number 2022-68. Item number 8, 2022-69. And item number 10, 2022-70.
All righty, thank you, Amanda. Okay, we're on to agenda item number 13. It's a resolution in support of the 30 by 30 initiative. If I can get a motion and a second to begin discussion, please.
So moved.
Moved by Vice Chair Murillo. I'll second that motion. Okay. So I have this resolution that was brought forward. I had working with some of our community members. In particular, we have some representatives from our friends of the Oregon Mountain Desert Peaks here that we had worked on this resolution. This resolution really is showing, or what I'm asking for here is that Doña Ana County show the support for the federal initiative by President Joe Biden, the 30 by 30 initiative, which is to conserve 30% of our public lands and waters by 2030. And I think there's a myriad of reasons, among them for environmental purposes as well as for access for our public. I know here in the state of New Mexico, we're pretty lucky in that we have quite a bit of public lands, but we see that the access is disproportionately affects those that are lower income or not lack of access. And so one of the things that I know we've worked on here in Doña Ana County was continuing to find ways in which we can continue to improve that access for those within the county. I know on the state level, the governor has recently created the Office of Outdoor Recreation, of which we have been the recipient of several grant applications. And so on a larger scale, when we look at the state, we've continued to see some of the other counties that have pushed back against some of the work that even on the state level they've been working on. And so what I'm requesting here as the commission is that we show this support for this initiative, for the initiatives of the administration of Governor Lujan Grisham, and as well as for our community, because I think we have the perfect example of the creation of the National Monument here, that public lands works for the public, for private businesses, and for our individuals. And much of the rhetoric that we do here kind of pushing back against this is very similar to what we heard for the creation of the National Monument, which meant, I would say, all the criticisms have not come to fruition as advertised. So I don't know, I'd like to invite some of the community members. I know we have members from the Sierra Club and the Friends of the Oregon Mountains. If you have anything to add, I'd like to invite you all up, please.
Hi, Commissioners. Patrick Nolan. My name is Patrick Nolan. I already said that. I serve as Executive Director with Friends of Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks. I just want to echo what Commissioner Sanchez was saying. We are in a climate crisis, right? And one thing we know that can help us in this climate crisis is protecting our land and water. And 30 by 30 really represents a benchmark and a goal that is driven by science that'll help us mitigate some of the impacts that we are seeing. Impacts that we are seeing here in the Chihuahuan Desert, right? We are often at the forefront of some of these impacts of climate change because of our water scarcity. So it's never a bad idea to protect public lands. And I think 30 by 30 really helps sort of drive that point home. And I will also say that as this vision is sort of being built, and there's several community conversations that need to happen around this issue, but this can also help private landowners in water restoration, water rights, and getting their land to an ecologically healthy and balanced place, right? So 30 by 30 is really an all-encompassing goal, and I think it really serves our community and our people well. And it echoes the goals of President Joe Biden. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, I believe last year, had an executive order around this too as well. So it really echoes what's happening across the state. And I think it'd be really great to see some support from the southern part of New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. And I will add one thing, within the resolution here, one of the items that it notices or mentions here in one of the whereases is that we had noted previously that the outdoor recreation industry had generated $1.9 billion for the state of New Mexico. I think there was a article in the Sun News this morning with some updated figures that actually within the last year, that amount did increase from 1.9 billion, I think, to 2.7 billion. And so we're continuing to see that value, like I said, return on investment that we're putting into public land. So, but I don't know, Lisa, if there's any questions from commissioners regarding this resolution? No. Any other public input?
I did have a quick comment. Thank you very much, commissioners. Good afternoon. My name is Luis Guerrero. I am the legislative and political organizer with the Sierra Club Rio Grande chapter, as well as a resident of Doñana District Commission, or Commission District number 4, as well as somebody that deeply cares about our planet and conservation, wildlife, and climate and for future generations. As Patrick mentioned, scientists do warn that we must conserve and restore at least 30% of lands and waters by 2030 if we hope to preserve the biodiversity and ecosystems, as well as mitigate the impacts on climate change, such as drought, which is worsening as we've seen in a lot of parts of the state. I mean, we don't have to go too far back in history. We saw what happened in northern New Mexico, and we've seen it in the Gila, we've seen it in a lot closer to home than that. And this resolution reflects what New Mexicans want. 77% of voters in New Mexico support setting a national goal of conserving 30% of lands and waters in the United States. By 2030, about 58% are concerned about the future of land, water, air, and wildlife. So, again, just want to thank you all very much and just ask you to vote yes for this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Okay. If there aren't any other questions or comments from the commission, I'm hoping one thing, and while not kind of sidetrack a little bit from this, but one of the things that I think we've done particularly well with the county is we're working on utilizing our public spaces for outdoor recreation. I think one example that we have is Chaparral, where we had the recent BMX track that was created. I would hope that, not specific to this resolution, but as a commission, that we could continue to find ways that we can utilize our community centers to create hubs for our community to go out and use outdoor recreation. Like one example or thought, where we have the BMX bike track, could we theoretically have, equipment that we could have, bikes that people could loan in the community. If they don't have a bike, they can still come to the community center and utilize those public spaces. Could we have classes that are specific to, whether it be up in Hatch or down in the southern part of the county, that show what is around specifically for the community so that our kids can start to explore and look at opportunities, so they're not stuck on screens. They can start to explore our local areas and the beauty we have in Doña Ana County. So like I said, just a thought I hope we can hopefully work on here in the future with this commission.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Reynolds.
I think we might actually, since we have all the community centers and all the resources and definition or descriptions of them on our website, we might actually add some information and some links there in order to enhance that so people know more about what the resources are available and what potential hikes, trails, things like that are available, out and throughout the county. So I think that's a great idea to add that to our website.
Yeah, thank you. So, okay, if there are no other questions, I'll ask Amanda if you can call the roll, please, on agenda item 13.
Commissioner Ellens?
Yes.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Yes.
Vice Chair Murillo?
Yes.
Chair Sanchez?
Yes.
This approval has a resolution number 2022-71.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so we're on to agenda item number 2, which is recognize election officials for their service in Doña Ana County. I believe that many of those that were invited would be participating in our canvassing meeting at 1 o'clock. So it's 12:33. What I'd like to do is that we request we take a recess until, say, 12:55. So that'll give us about 20 minutes to before we come back, and then we can look at agenda item 2, where we'll have more people that we can recognize, and then we can move into our canvassing board meeting at 1 p.m. So if there are no objections, we'll recess till 12:55.
see who's there for public input. Have them decide.
Oh, okay. This is.
This will be, no. We'll see what
She reminded me.
He had said he had to run home to get his glasses. He'd be back. No way. Have to run off about 11, or about 1:25 for a brief
Okay.
Fred would be here.
Okay. If you want to just reconvene, and we can handle the resolution or the proclamation. It's 1 o'clock.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I know we're running 5 minutes behind here, so it's 1 p.m. We'll reconvene here in open session. We'll be looking at, we're now at agenda item number 2, which is a proclamation to recognize our election officials for their service in Doña Ana County. If I can get a motion and a second to begin discussion.
I so move.
Moved by Vice Chair Murillo. I will second the motion.
And Mr. Chairman, may I interrupt just for a moment? Could we have a show of hands of those that are in the audience that are election officials?
Absolutely.
Just to see how many we have present. Okay, great.
Well, I appreciate it, and I see, I know, Dr. Askin, I know you'll want to add a few words, but I just want to start off by introducing this proclamation, and to our election officials, I want to say thank you. Want to take this moment to thank you for the work, the efforts that you put in at our elections this year for our primary and then the general election. Very often, all the efforts and everything that you do throughout election season goes without recognition. And truly, without all of your efforts, we wouldn't have such an availability for our residents, for our voters to be able to come out and vote, whether it be here at the government center for early voting, at the convenience centers, but just a simple thank you for all that you do for Doña Ana County, for the state of New Mexico, and for all of the voters each and every year. So like I said, thank you. Dr. Askin, I don't know if you want to come up and add anything.
Good afternoon, Chair Sanchez, Commissioners, and I believe Mr. Reynolds is coming through. So in 2020, the importance of election officials was really highlighted. We were in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic. We had a very, very big election, both in the primary as well as the general. And folks were saying, I cannot work, because they were concerned about the health and safety of themselves or the health and safety of somebody that they loved or they lived with. And since then, election officials have stepped up in a way that has been incredibly moving. We've had grandchildren come to our election officials training and serve and say things along the lines of, my grandma always did this, and now it's my turn. Those were the moments in 2020 that really kind of brought it full circle to how important election officials are. When you talk about elections in Doña Ana County, you're also talking about the good men and women from all different walks of life who literally prop up elections in our community that we would not be able to administer them without them. So thank you is something we say, it's not enough. There is an idea that election officials are volunteers. We do pay them, but frankly, it's not enough. Election day can sometimes be up to, and I wish I was exaggerating, an 18-hour day. for some folks. And so sometimes we have those that are above 60, but they still so much believe in what we do and want to be a part of it that they agree to serve. And even after an exhausted day, they often feel exhilarated. So I'm here to just, a thank you is not sufficient, but really honor the service and the work and the detail and the training and all of the things that go into becoming an election official. We greatly appreciate you. I will talk a little bit more about my staff when I head into discussing the election in general, but I will say that election officials is kind of a bigger title, and it, under the umbrella, it also includes the staff in our office that are election officials, as well as myself and my Chief Deputy, Lindsay Bachman. So we're all election officials, formerly known as poll workers, those that work our sites, and now called election officials. And so we're here to honor them. We're proud to stand with them, and we greatly and deeply appreciate their service to their community.
Thank you, Dr. Askin. And I truly, even the people in your staff, I mean, it's 50, I know we're talking about the results here during the canvassing board in a little bit, but 58,000 votes here in Doña Ana County. And I know that was pretty close on par with 2018. But just when you think of the number of the task and the size of that task to make sure that was all counted, thank you for you, your staff, and all of everybody else that helped in any way during this process.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. Commissioners, also to recognize that historically, I think there was kind of an idea that elections had a lull between them, and there really is no lull in elections anymore. Now that our county is running all of the local elections, we do have a little bit of what could be considered a lull in the spring, but it's really not. We continue the work, and frankly, we start preparing for election in June in terms of getting our election officials situated. So it is nonstop, and our staff is nonstop, and they do it without complaints because they know that what they're doing is benefiting our community. So,
Great. Thank you. Now, I don't know, Commission, did you have any comments on proclamation?
Mr. Chairman.
Only to say thank you. You know, on the last day of voting, I mean, I didn't get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You know, I didn't stay there till 7 o'clock at night, you know, but you guys did. And I tell you, that's tremendous sacrifice on your part, commitment to what we're trying to do, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for that effort and for everything you do to make these elections fair and safe. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like for me to read the
Please,
proclamation.
if you don't mind.
Whereas election officials are local, temporary workers from all walks of life and make up the front line of democracy, they are essential to our ability to conduct free and fair elections throughout Doña Ana County. And whereas the citizens of Doña Ana County depend on the election officials to provide the information needed and ensure that every ballot is counted when they actively participate in the local electoral process. And whereas election officials undergo election training and take an oath of office to faithfully support the New Mexico Constitution and the Constitution of the United States, many election officials are veterans, retirees, or senior citizens who participate in the election process. And whereas election officials are registered as voters who put aside their party affiliations to support a fair and transparent election process for all of us. Election officials' dedication and commitment assisted more than 58,000 voters in our community in the most recent election. And whereas election officials work hundreds of hours in each election cycle, from the start of early voting on the 11th of October through Election Day on the 8th of November. The officials also help to tally the results post-Election Day. We cannot thank or recognize election officials enough for their monumental effort, without which our election system would crumble. Now, therefore, the Doña Ana County Board of Commissioners does hereby proclaim the month of October as Election Officials Month. Mr. Chairman, a proclamation for the consideration of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Macias. All right. I don't know if there's any other input or any of the other those that are here to be recognized would like say a few words, but if not, I'll ask Amanda, will you call the roll on the proclamation?
Commissioner Allens?
Yes.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Yes.
Vice Chair Murillo?
Yes.
Chair Sanchez?
Yes, the motion passes. Thank you, election workers. And for everyone that's here to be recognized, we'd like to invite you to come up and have a picture with the proclamation, please.
Come on, y'all, don't be shy.
Careful with that. Do you need for us to get out of the way?
I'm still not able to get everybody. More of the table. Okay, here we go. Everybody look this way. Keep your eyes open. Thank you. Thank you.
Good luck, Lindsay, with your
Last year I can do that.
Please, Dr.
Chair Sanchez, members of the commission, and fellow citizens. This was my first experience of volunteering as an election official. It's a point of great pride especially for an immigrant to participate in our democracy at the ground level like this. And even though as Commissioner Reynolds pointed out, the day was long. We started at 6 and it was almost 11 by the time I got home. It was not unlike some of my work days or training days when I was practicing, because even though I was exhausted, there was a feeling of satisfaction. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to urge more people to do this kind of volunteering. Because as Chair Sanchez pointed out, this is the bedrock of our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Doctor, if you wouldn't mind stating your name for the record.
Oh, I'm Dr. Rama Devastali.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right.
Again, Mr. Chairman, we may wish to adjourn formally as the Board of County Commissioners.
Correct.
And then reconvene.
All right, so it is 11:14, and so we will now adjourn as the Board of County Commissioners and the County Board of Finance in open session. What we will do is give, I think, our folks, our IT, or not our IT, but our production folks in the back a few minutes to switch over, end this video, and start for our canvassing board. So we'll give them 5 minutes to prepare for that. Just in preparation for our canvassing meeting, are there those here in the public that we're going to look to speak in during that or provide public input? If you would raise your hand, I'm trying to gauge those that are going to be speaking. Okay. Okay, very good. So we'll give them 5 minutes. It's almost, so we'll say 1:20 to do all the changeover for our YouTube and broadcast, and then we will start at 1:20 for the canvassing meeting.